being recorded.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me. This is Heather Gray, aka the LymeBoss, on another LymeBoss podcast. Today, I've got the phenomenal Andrea Weinmeyer, and she's a fellow FDN, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, like myself. And today, we're going to be talking all about healing from histamine issues. So I'm sure she's got her own backstory to tell us on why she got involved in talking about histamines and why you should care, especially if you've got Lyme disease, mold, or if you've been diagnosed with like mast cell and all that surge, fun stuff. Like they're all kind of intertwined there. So if you've gone down a route and you haven't gotten better, this might be a place to look. So let's dive in a little deeper and talk about histamine issues. Thank you, Andrea, for joining us today.
Yeah, hi, Heather. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. So why don't you tell us a little bit about like what got you into talking about histamines?
Yeah, well, it was my own personal experience with it. I didn't really know much at all about it before my own personal experience. So it was the months leading up to my 40th birthday that I started developing really serious health issues, and I was getting all these like crazy allergic kinds of reactions out of nowhere. I would wake up in the middle of the night and my eyes would be swelling shut and I'd get hives. I'd have difficulty breathing. And it was really weird because it was happening, like I said, in the middle of the night. So I hadn't eaten anything for so many hours and there was nothing new in my environment. So I went to my doctor and he referred me to an allergist and he said, yeah, no, this isn't allergies, but he just gave me a couple idiopathic diagnoses. So idiopathic, for anyone that doesn't know, it means we don't know. We have no idea why this is happening to you.
That's an awfully fancy word for we don't know.
Exactly, right? They got to make it sound better. So yeah, I got a couple diagnoses of idiopathic urticaria and idiopathic angioedema. It just means, yeah, hives and swelling for no known reason. Said, here's some antihistamines, like who knows if this is ever going to go away, who knows why it's happening, and like just sent me on my way. And and that really didn't sit well with me. Like it made no sense to me, like why would this be happening for no reason? So I sought out a naturopath and I went down that route. And the naturopath that I saw did some tests, some functional tests on me. But the only thing that really came back of concern to her was candida overgrowth in my large intestine, so a yeast overgrowth. And of course, whatever, she put me on a candida plan, supplements and a candida diet, and then gave me just a couple supplements for my histamine metabolism, but she didn't talk to me about histamine. She just said, here's a couple supplements and they're for histamine metabolism. I learned later these supplements were completely wrong for my own personal biochemistry and my own histamine metabolism. But anyway, so I got worse on this plan of hers, unfortunately. Like I did everything she said, but what I did is I cut out grains and sugar from my diet, which doesn't sound like a bad thing, but I was replacing them with all of these really high histamine foods, but I didn't know the foods were high histamine. So I was eating things like, I was having bone broth because it was supposed to be good for me. And I was having all these fermented foods and I was eating like aged meats and eggs and like all this stuff that was super high histamine. And I ended up, unfortunately, with like a really severe anaphylactic reaction a few weeks into her plan, and I almost died. I ended up, it was really bad. I had to get like 3 EpiPens, all kinds of IDV medications. Like, thankfully, I was able to be stabilized, but after this, my health took a complete crash. It's really weird. Before this, I was having these reactions, but I felt fine otherwise. But then this event just totally crashed my system. So I was experiencing like really, really severe fatigue. I couldn't do anything anymore after this incident. Like I couldn't even walk my dog for like 10 minutes. I'd have to like sit down and rest. There was times driving was too strenuous for me. I had to pull over and take a rest, because I would be feeling so dizzy. And I started developing all these other really weird symptoms, like all these neuro symptoms. I was having like brain fog.
Is that your
like,
dog?
Pardon me? Oh, can you hear my dog? Yeah, I've got a dog named Otis, and he's crying because I'm paying attention to you all and not him. My health totally changed after this, right? Like I was completely exhausted. I was having all these like neurological symptoms, brain fog and tinnitus and pins and needles, all this kind of stuff. And then I was going into anaphylaxis regularly after this. I was reacting to all kinds of foods I had never reacted to before. I got down at one point to like 12 different foods I could eat, and I couldn't eat more than that. And my diet was just like super restricted, and which, you know, a lot of people dealing with histamine issues can relate to that, because that's one way of trying to control it, but not always the best way. But anyway, so I just, yeah, I got really, really sick. And so I kept seeking out natural help, and I went and saw, like, I don't know, 15 maybe different kinds of practitioners over the next like year or two, spent like thousands, tens and tens of thousands of dollars. And like, unfortunately, there wasn't very many practitioners that really understood what I was dealing with. I did find one that helped me understand that what I was dealing with was something called histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome. Like, I was on that end of the spectrum of how bad I was. So yeah, but unfortunately still didn't have a lot of answers for me about how to get well. So, you know, I went into like deep research mode. I kept working with people, and eventually I went back to school and became an FDN. And, you know, thankfully I was able to figure it out, you know, did so many different functional tests to figure out what was going on in my body, worked on all aspects of my health, right? Like, I think anyone who deals with chronic illness knows that it's not just about physical healing. There's other parts of healing that need to happen too. So yeah, I just did some really deep healing for a couple of years, but I was able to figure it out, and I was able to reverse most of what was going on with me. And thankfully today, like, I'm like 90% better. There's days where I feel like 100% better, but some days it's like 85, but like, I'm a lot better now. I can eat almost anything. I still avoid the very highest histamine foods, but like, my energy is back. Yeah, I can walk my dog for 2 hours, like, no problem. And
That's
yeah.
awesome. It's crazy because I have a Weston A. Price background, and Weston A. Price is all about fermented foods, right? And the bone broth. And I remember even just like a year ago, I did the same thing to myself. I was making my own kefir. I was making my own sauerkraut. I was making my own kombucha. I was making my own bone broth. And within like 2 weeks, I was in so much freaking pain. I had gained like 10 pounds in 2 weeks.
Oh,
It was insane. And I was like, and then I found out that I don't process histamines real well. And that's what I did to myself. And so I've gotten to the point now where I can actually add some of that stuff back in, but in small doses. I can't do all the things all at the same time. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the higher histamine foods?
yeah. So anything that's aged or fermented, okay, because as histamine, you know, sits around, it actually can grow histamine levels. So anything that is fermented, like sauerkraut and, you know, kefir, like you mentioned, kombucha, all those kinds of things, aged meats, especially like cured meats, like, you know, bacon and sausage, and then leftovers can be problematic too. So, you know, if you're a person that likes to like batch cook and eat throughout the week, well, by the end of that week, there's going to be a lot higher histamine levels in that food, you know. So those are the high histamine foods, but there's this whole other category of foods that aren't actually high in histamine, but what they do is they can either block an enzyme called diamine oxidase that we make, and that degrades histamine in our gut. And so there's some foods that actually can block that functioning of that enzyme. And then there's foods that actually can just encourage histamine release in the body. So these are like the DAO blocking foods. These are things like caffeine, so caffeinated beverages, chocolate, and alcohol. Those are the main ones. And then, but then the other foods are like really seemingly healthy, yummy foods like citrus fruits and strawberries and avocados and spinach and nuts. Bananas, right? Yeah. So, you know, and it does seem kind of random. I remember when I was like learning about this, it just seemed like, what, you know, like, why strawberries, you know? But yeah, so there's lists out there on the internet though that can give full lists. But, you know, I think the important thing that people need to know though when they're trying to figure this stuff out is you don't need to cut out everything. You don't find a list on the internet, you know, that says all these high histamine foods, and you don't necessarily have to cut them all out, right? Like, so you just have to figure out like where your own personal tolerance is and trying to manage this. And diet is really just a management tool. You know, like I now can eat a lot higher histamine foods. Like I don't have to keep them out of my diet anymore, you know. And I had severe histamine issues.
Yeah,
you know,
no, that's crazy. I mean, anaphylactic stuff, that's some scary shit right there.
There is, yeah. No doubt.
So what are some lab tests? Like how did you come to realize that it was a histamine that was your problem? And or is histamine the problem? Is there even a deeper, more root cause?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, because histamine is not the problem, right? Like histamine, it's really important in our bodies. It does all kinds of super important things. Like honestly, we wouldn't be able to survive without it. So it's not the problem. It's just that when things are going on internally, and usually what's happening honestly is that we have like things going on in our body that are making it so that we are creating too much histamine in our body, like more than we should be. And these are things like bacterial overgrowth, right? Like bacteria and yeast and stuff like that, they can create histamine on their own. And then there's anything that will activate mast cells, anything that's like stressing out your system can like increase histamine levels in your body. So it's not, histamine is not the problem. It's just like when you get too much, and then on the flip side of it, when you can't break it down, because we have all these mechanisms in our body for breaking down histamine, and things can go wrong there too. So that's usually what's going on. There's internal things going on. Histamine intolerance itself is not like a root cause. It's just like symptomology really is what it is. So, yeah, but in terms of lab tests, sorry to answer your question, there are some lab tests you can run to figure, like you can do like blood plasma histamine levels. There's some functional labs you can do to look at histamine levels in your gut, but I actually didn't run any of those myself. It was very obvious. I mean, I was having very obvious allergic types of symptoms. Histamine intolerance doesn't always present that way. We have histamine receptors on pretty much all cells in our bodies. So, it acts like a neurotransmitter in our brain, and like it actually helps our heartbeat, and we like produce histamine in our gut so that we can produce stomach acid and all of these other kinds of things. So mine was obvious because I was having all these allergic type of reactions, but some people are actually just having like migraines or GI distress, and it's not obviously allergic, so they might not guess histamine right away. But I really figured it out with the help initially with a naturopath. I did trial a low histamine diet. I did, start really finding things in my body that I knew were creating histamine. Like I said, I had there were certain bacterial overgrowths I had that were creating histamine in my body. And so, it was just obvious. And I responded really well to the low histamine diet at first. That did help my symptoms. So that was just like, a dead giveaway kind of that I was having issues with histamine. But I did all kinds of most of the lab tests that I did were more like looking at root cause kind of stuff. Like that's where I really focused all my attention.
Gotcha. So you talked about a bacterial overgrowth as being part of your root cause. What were some other things that contributed to this?
Oh man, I had it all, like everything that could contribute. So I had completely very poor adrenal health. Like all my testing showed that and the adrenals are actually really important in managing histamine, cortisol, which is like a main stress hormone. It's very anti-inflammatory and very antihistamine. And we don't want too much of it, of course. We want healthy levels of it, but my adrenals weren't making any anymore. And so that was one factor. But I also had like every kind of chronic infection you could think of. I had a parasitic infection, I had fungal overgrowth, I had bacterial overgrowth, I had chronic viral stuff, like I had a EBV reactivation, I had mold toxicity, I had like it all in terms of like the physical stuff that was going on. But I also had like emotional trauma. Like I had just finished working as an emergency social worker, doing emergency social work for like 4 years. Oof. Yeah. And I also had my own, and I also had my own childhood history of trauma. So there was like, my system was just operating in fight or flight, like my entire life. So like all of these things factored into why I got so sick. It wasn't just one thing.
Right. So were you one of those super sensitive types that when you started doing this, like you said you could only eat like 12 foods. So yeah. How do you start to move the needle with somebody that's so sensitive that can't hardly eat anything and then also like reacts to certain supplements? Like how did you start to get started?
Yeah, so I mean, the low histamine diet was helpful for me at the beginning because it reduced my inflammation levels and gave like my sort of bucket some room in it. So that was helpful. But then, you know what, I actually really focused on like not putting things into my body. Like I didn't start with supplements because I really couldn't tolerate a lot of them. So I did a lot of things to help my nervous system. Like I started doing like breath work. I was doing like hydrotherapy with like hot and cold therapy. You know, there's a lot of like non-supplement food things that you can do to sort of give people, bring down inflammation levels in their body so that they can start tolerating supplements. And so little by little, I was able to start tolerating supplements. And you know, I did a lot of trial and error, you know, so I did things that would flare me up. Like I really went after like trying to deal with all my infections at the beginning because they were obvious root causes. You know, I'm like, okay, I just need to deal with these infections. But like, oh my God, my body was not ready for that at the beginning. So, you know, I would try and I would get flared up and I'd have to take a couple steps back. So I really worked on my adrenal health. Like I changed my job. I couldn't do the emergency social work anymore. I had to change my job. I had to change my lifestyle. I had to really work on my circadian rhythm because it was so messed up. I was doing shift work before this. Yeah. So I had to do all those kinds of things just to like get the foundation down, you know, like, so I worked probably for a year straight on just like getting my nutrition levels back up, getting my adrenal health back up, calming down my nervous system. And working on detoxification too, like really gently. And then, you know, I would do things like Epsom salt baths. I could tolerate those, you know, stuff like that. And then I started sweating, which was like increasing the detox. And then I was at a point where I could start dealing with the infections. And I had to do that very slowly. But honestly, every time I went through like a protocol for something, it definitely moved the needle. So like, I know those were like big underlying factors for me because every time I dealt with an infection, I would get better. And then I would deal with the next thing. But it's all like, you know how it is. It's an onion. There's layers. Something reveals something else every time you do something. So yeah, but it was slow and steady.
Totally bums me out because when I graduated FDN in like 2013, so I'm kind of like an OG there. I think there was only like 2 classes before me. But when I graduated, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about histamine intolerances, right? Or I had never, ever, ever met people this sensitive before. Even with my history of Lyme and mold, like I just never had those sensitivities. And I remember one of my very first clients, you know, so we doing the FDN way and I'm getting ready to start the parasite started the protocol and he's like, I can't take supplements. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't take supplements? And he's like, I can't take supplements. I'm like, I don't know what to do with it then, you know, like, but no, I mean, we just do need to take a couple steps back because really when you act that way, you're acting no differently than a doctor, right? For a pill for every ill. So here's the problem. So here's a pill. Let's go back down the line a little further, right? And let's start with some more supportive things and looking at adrenals and breath work and lifestyle, right? Because it pisses me off so bad. There's even still, I have some clients that are like, I got this going on. What supplement do you recommend? And then I ask, well, have you been doing your breath work or your somatic experiencing stuff? Or have you been meditating or grounding? And they're like, no. And I'm like, I'm not giving you another supplement recommendation. Like until you learn to calm down, right? Like I'm not going to continue to just to throw supplements at you. Like you're going to end up relapsing, right? I can get you so much better with supplements, but in the end, if you don't learn these other foundational things, which you spoke of, thank you, you're going to end up relapsing. Like I'm speaking from personal experience. I imagine Andrea, she's sitting there shaking her head. So yes, please, don't pass go. Do not collect $200. You need to get that nervous system stuff regulated. You need to support your adrenals. So thank you.
Yeah, totally.
So how long did it take you? Because this didn't sound like an overnight thing.
No, I mean, you know, I mean, I've heard all kinds of stories now by this point, and you know, it takes a long time to get sick, you know, so you know, you can't expect to totally heal from like a really serious chronic illness in 2 months. It's just not realistic. But you know, for me, I had that really severe anaphylactic reaction like about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. So it took me 4 years to get to this point, and I made a lot of, like I said, like I was like, you know, throwing stuff at the wall to see what would stick. There was so much trial and error involved, like, you know, so I'm sure it could have been faster, you know, if I would have like really understood what my body needed and like sort of the order of progression of how to heal, you know, for myself. But yeah, but 4 years though.
Well, and I'm sure because you're working with clients now, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine you've got that timeline shortened down a little bit. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's like I was very sick. A lot of the people that I see now, like there's a spectrum, right? But I was very, very sick, to be fair. I had a severe sort of case going on.
Well, and I love that honesty though. Like Dr. Rawls, who's big in the Lyme world, he says that it took him like 3 or 4 years to heal. I think sometimes we get caught up in this marketing bullshit that we see out there, get better in 3 months, or, make 6 figures in 6 months, like it's actually all crap, because it really is, it's a time thing. And I think we're setting ourselves up for failure if you're kind of getting involved with someone who's like, oh yeah, I can turn this around for you in 3 months. You should be getting some wins, right, within those 2 to 3 months, but like to complete remission type of thing, and where you're eating more foods and you're feeling more balanced and you're back to your old self, like that takes time.
It does. It totally does. And I'm not going to set anyone up for failure, and I'm not going to mislead anybody in thinking that, we're just going to have everything turned around in 90 days. That's just not realistic. And, if you do things the right way, even though it takes longer, like it's longer lasting, more foundational health outcomes, right? Like it's not just a couple symptoms go away, but then 3 months later it comes back.
Well, and it sets you up for long-term success, whether it's histamine issues or Lyme disease or COVID, or, fill in the blank for the next big bad thing that's going to come down the line. When you get these foundations in place, it's just going to set you up for success for long-term longevity, period, end of story.
Yeah, exactly. No, you and me totally thinking the same way there. That's my approach too. And I actually don't work with people in less than 6-month packages, because it's just like, no, that's not what I'm here for. I really want to support people in achieving like long-term good foundational.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, so where are you located at? Because I'm catching a lot of long O's.
Oh, I'm in Canada.
Okay.
I'm in Calgary, Alberta of Canada.
Oh, nice. I know. I love that accent. I don't know why, but I'm like, oh, where are you from?
Yeah, you caught that, hey?
I did catch it. It's awesome. Anywho, tell us, this is the shameless plug time. Like, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I think the easiest place to find me is just on my website. It's www.instarwellness.com. And I'm so late to the social media game. I just started an Instagram account, so I do have a link to my Instagram on my website. Yeah. I've just been working through word of mouth to this point, but yeah.
So, but that's Instar. So like INSTAR.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And what is that? What is the Instar? Where'd you come up with that?
Yeah, so that's a very personal story. I'm one of those people that used a personal story for their business name, but I was so sick. Like I was fearing for my life, right? Like I was having life-threatening reactions like all the time. And so I just remember I just had this one thing that I would say to myself to keep me going. I would keep telling myself, like, I am in a cocoon, I am a butterfly. And I would tell myself that all the time just to keep myself going. And so Instar is one of the phases of the metamorphosis of a butterfly. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Because people don't realize, like, that worm, that caterpillar, like turns into a dissolved piece of goo, like before it comes out as a butterfly. Like that process that it takes has got to be ridiculously painful. And what a beautiful little reminder of folks, because it is so tough. But man, looking back on it now, I'm a better person because of it. I'm not sure where I would be in my life without having those health issues, because I was burning the candle at both ends. I was drinking, I was partying, I was, not the greatest of person. And so it was a nice little wake up call for me. I think that's the only way I get messages sometimes is from the cosmic, 2x4 upside the head said, okay, you're not going to pay attention. Hopefully now we've got your attention. And so, but that's why we share these stories, is just to let you know that it can be done. It takes time. Be patient with yourself, right? Be patient with the process. And Andrea, thanks again for joining us today, and sharing your story and all your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Heather, so much.
And everybody else, make sure and have a healthy day.
I had a life, and then I had Lyme. the wave one, having seen what I've seen and the results and the many testimonials, it just really makes sense. The thing that I just have wanted the most is just to heal with my kids and just have fun. And so for me, it just ignited this new spark, like our life is so short, our health is so precious.